The sun blazed high above the city that afternoon, casting shimmering waves of heat across the pavement. Horns echoed endlessly in the distance, and the sidewalks teemed with people in their usual urban rush. It was a day like any other in a sprawling modern metropolis, until something extraordinary broke the rhythm. Down the bustling avenue rolled a motorcade, sleek and solemn, the lead vehicle gleaming like polished steel under the relentless sun. It was Cadillac One, unmistakable in its grandeur. Inside sat Donald Trump, absorbed in a briefing delivered by one of his advisors. The assistant's voice was steady, detailing policies and statistics, but Trump's eyes suddenly drifted to the window. And there, in the chaos of the sidewalk, stood a figure so out of place it stopped him cold. An elderly woman, frail, hunched, barely able to stay upright, clutched a battered cardboard sign. Her clothes were worn, her face deeply lined by time and hardship, and her thin white hair fluttered in the breeze. The sign she held was faded, the ink smudged by sun and sorrow, but the message was clear. Please help me. My granddaughter needs a miracle. She didn't cry out. She didn't wave. She just stood there, silently pleading with anyone who might look her way. Most people didn't. They passed by, some avoiding her entirely, others casting quick, uncomfortable glances before moving on. Trump watched her, unmoving. The words on the sign echoed in his mind. A strange stillness settled over him. He leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on the woman. "Stop the car," he said quietly but firmly. The convoy came to an abrupt halt, brakes squealing. Drivers in the rear slammed their horns in protest, but the motorcade stood still in the middle of the street. Inside the vehicle, Trump's staff exchanged tense glances. "Sir, we should keep moving," one security officer cautioned. "This isn't a secure location." Trump didn't respond right away. His gaze never wavered from the figure on the sidewalk. "I want to speak to her," he said at last. There was hesitation, but no one challenged him. A door opened. Trump stepped out. Instantly, the city seemed to hush. The presence of the former president walking down a crowded street was jarring. Phones came out. Pedestrians froze mid-step, but Trump's focus was unwavering. He walked toward the woman, each step deliberate. She barely noticed him until he stood directly in front of her. Then she looked up, startled, unsure, and perhaps even afraid. He knelt slightly to meet her gaze, not as a politician, not as a mogul, but as a man who wanted to understand. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low and kind. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice cracking with age and emotion. "Martha." He nodded gently. "Why are you here, Martha?" She held the sign a little tighter, as if it might fall apart if she didn't. Her lips trembled. "My granddaughter. She's all I have left. Her parents, my son and his wife, they died in a flood. We lost our home, everything. I don't know what to do anymore. I just want to save her." Trump stood silently for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, not pity but resolve. "Get the car ready," he called out, turning to his staff. "I want to see where she's staying." "Sir, this is really not—" "If she can live there," Trump interrupted, "then I can visit. If anyone's afraid, they can stay behind." No one moved. He turned back to Martha and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Lead the way." Martha moved slowly, her fragile form trembling with every step, as if the very air weighed her down. She still held her old cardboard sign, now pressed to her chest like something sacred. Behind her, the motorcade rolled along cautiously, its polished black vehicles a surreal contrast to the crumbling sidewalks and graffiti-stained walls of the neighborhood. Trump walked beside her in silence, matching her pace, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The cracks in the pavement, the broken windows, the sorrowful stares from those peeking through worn-out curtains. This wasn't just poverty. It was abandonment. "Mrs. Martha," he said gently, breaking the silence, "can you tell me what happened to your family?" She paused in her steps, then turned to look at him. Her eyes, clouded with age, shimmered with unshed tears. "It was the flood," she said slowly. "Came out of nowhere. The water rose so fast, we didn't have time to pack or run. My son, Jack, and his wife, Laura, they told me to take Emma and go, said they'd catch up, but they never did." Her hands trembled as she spoke, gripping the sign tighter. The current was too strong. It swept them away. I held onto Emma and prayed. When I found Jack, it was already too late. Tears began to trickle down her cheeks, but her voice didn't waver. "We lost our home, our things, everything. Now it's just the two of us. She's only a child, and I'm too old to give her the life she deserves." Trump said nothing at first. Her words sank deep into his thoughts. He He wasn't just listening to a personal tragedy, he was hearing the quiet anguish of thousands like her. "What have you been doing since then?" he asked, softer now. Martha sighed. "Whatever I could. Cleaning, recycling, odd jobs. But I can't do much anymore. People don't hire someone like me. In the end, I made this sign and hoped someone might care." She kept walking, slower now, her story adding years to her already bent frame. They turned down a narrow alley where the buildings seemed to lean inward, casting deep shadows. Trash was piled against the walls, and a foul odor hung in the air. The motorcade behind them hesitated, unsure whether to proceed. "We're here," Martha whispered. She pointed to a makeshift structure at the end of the alley, a fragile shelter of tarps, plastic sheets, and scrap wood. It barely held together, sagging under its own weight. Inside, a broken bed frame and a few battered plastic chairs sat amid cracked concrete. Cardboard boxes stacked into a table stood in the center. Trump stopped in front of it, his expression darkening. He scanned the squalor, the emptiness, the sheer absence of dignity. Children nearby stopped playing with old tin cans to look at him. Adults peeked from behind corners. Their eyes were wary, suspicious. Some recognized him. None knew what to make of the scene. Then from inside the shelter a soft voice called out, "Grandma?" A little girl appeared, no older than 10. Her tangled hair hung in her eyes, and she clutched a handmade doll crafted from a plastic bottle and rags. "Emma!" Martha called. The girl ran to her, wrapping her arms tightly around her grandmother's waist, her eyes, wide and cautious, fixed on Trump. "You don't have to be afraid," Trump said gently, lowering himself to her level. "Your name is Emma, right?" The girl gave a small nod. "Can you tell me about yourself?" Emma glanced up at Martha. With a quiet nod of reassurance from her grandmother, she began to speak. "I don't remember much. Just water. Lots of it. Mom and Dad told me to run. I haven't seen them since." Her voice cracked. "Grandma tries so hard, but she's tired. I just want her to rest." Tears began to fall freely down her cheeks. Trump reached out, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You've been incredibly brave, Emma. And so has your grandma. But you don't have to do this alone anymore. I'm going to help." Emma blinked, her eyes filling with something new, hope. She said nothing, but clung to Martha's hand like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Trump stood and turned to his team, his tone commanding. "I want a full medical team here tonight. I want assessments for both Emma and Mrs. Martha, and not just them. I want a report on every family in this area." One of his advisors hesitated. "Sir, maybe this is better left to local charities." Trump cut him off. "They've waited long enough. If a little girl can stand in the street and beg for help for her grandmother, we don't have the right to delay." He looked down at Emma. Her face was streaked with tears, but a faint smile played at the corners of her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Trump," she whispered. "I just want Grandma to stop worrying." He knelt again, looking her in the eyes. "You've done your part, Emma. Now it's my turn." The path narrowed as Martha guided them deeper into the slum. Makeshift rooftops, stitched from rusted tin and faded plastic, jutted out overhead, casting strange shadows along the uneven ground. Puddles of stagnant water shimmered in the fading sunlight, and the sour scent of garbage hung thick in the air. Trump walked silently, his polished shoes now dulled by dust and grime. But he didn't slow down. With each step, the weight of the place pressed heavier on him, not just the poverty, but the invisible burden that every resident seemed to carry. People began to emerge from their shelters. Some watched from a distance. Others peeked cautiously from behind doors or tattered curtains. Their expressions ranged from disbelief to guarded hope. For many of them, seeing someone like him here felt like a dream they hadn't dared imagine. Martha looked back at Trump, her voice soft but unwavering. "Sir, it's not just me. Everyone here. We've all been left behind." Her words opened the floodgates. A man in his 40s stepped forward, his shirt torn, face weathered by sun and struggle. He hesitated, then said, "My name is Sam. I used to work at a mechanic's garage. After the flood, it was gone, washed away overnight. No job, no home. Now it's just me and my kids." He pointed to 2 small children crouched near a heap of junk, picking through cans with their bare hands. "I've tried to find work," Sam continued, voice breaking. "But no one wants a man without papers, without a place to sleep. I just want to give my kids a chance. Just one chance." Another voice chimed in. A young woman cradling a baby to her chest stepped into view. "My husband drowned in the flood. I work at a garment factory. Long hours, barely enough for food. I can't even think about school for them. I want better for my children." Then an older man, leaning heavily on a cane, made his way forward. "I served this country," he said, his voice gravelly. "I fought for it. But when I came back, I had nothing. No home, no job. I survive off food banks, but I'm invisible now." Story after story poured out. People who had once lived stable, even joyful lives, now stripped down to survival. Their pain wasn't new, it had just gone unheard. Trump listened to each of them, one by one. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in the weight of realization. These weren't statistics, these were families. Names, children. Emma tugged at his hand and whispered, "Everyone here's like us, Uncle. They just want to live, but it's so hard." The crowd had grown. Dozens, then hundreds, now stood around him, shoulder to shoulder, silent, eyes watching him. No one demanded answers. They just wanted to know, would this time be different? Trump stepped onto a large stone in the center of the alley, rising just enough for all to see him clearly. The hush that followed was thick with expectation. "I've heard your stories," he began. "And I want you to know, you are not invisible." A murmur swept through the crowd. "I can't undo what's been lost," he continued. "But I can promise you this. Starting today, you won't walk through this struggle alone. Change is coming, not just for Martha and Emma, but for every single person here." The silence broke, first with scattered claps, then a growing wave of applause, rising like a tide. For the first time in a long while, the people felt heard. Trump turned to his team. "I want a full medical team here tonight. Temporary shelters for those without roofs. A list of every family, every child, every need. I want results in 24 hours. An advisor opened his mouth, clearly about to raise logistical concerns. "No more delays," Trump snapped. "If a child can stand on a street corner begging for her grandmother, we don't have the right to stand still." Emma ran to him suddenly, wrapping her tiny hand around his fingers. "You're not leaving, are you?" she asked softly. "You'll really help everyone?" Trump knelt once more and met her eyes. "You've done more than most adults ever could," he said. "Now let me do my part. This is just the beginning, Emma." A gentle smile broke across her face, shy, uncertain, but real. The first in many days. As the sun dipped low behind the slum's rooftops, it cast long golden rays across the gathering crowd. And there, in the heart of what had long been forgotten, a spark of something long absent began to flicker again. Hope. The following morning began like no other the slum had seen in years. Gone was the quiet hum of daily survival. Instead, the air buzzed with the sound of engines, hurried footsteps, and determined voices. Large trucks rumbled into the narrow streets, carrying medical teams, relief supplies, and volunteers. The rumble of tires over cracked pavement echoed like a promise of change. People peeked out from behind makeshift curtains and corrugated doors, disbelief etched across their faces. It wasn't a dream. Help had arrived. Emma was the first to spot the trucks. She tugged hard on her grandmother's hand, eyes wide with excitement. "Grandma, look! They came! He really sent them." Martha stepped out from their shelter, clutching the doorway for balance. Her voice trembled. After all these years, someone actually kept their word. From their spot near the alley, they watched teams begin to unload crates of food, bottles of clean water, medical supplies, and warm clothing. Mobile health units unfolded into working clinics right there in the streets. Tents were being set up to house families without roofs. Children stood motionless, unsure whether to run, hide, or cheer. When it was their turn to be seen, a young doctor knelt beside Martha and gently took her hand. "How long have you been in this condition?" he asked, concern clouding his voice. Martha smiled faintly, wearied but proud. "I don't remember anymore. I kept going for Emma. She's all I have." Emma, standing tall beside her, squeezed her grandmother's hand. "We're not alone anymore, Grandma. They're really here. They're going to help us now." The doctor, clearly moved, gave instructions for medication, scheduled follow-ups, and made sure Martha would be checked regularly. For the first time in a long while, someone saw her as more than a burden. Elsewhere in the slum, the same scene played out again and again. Medical workers moved door to door. Nutrition packets were distributed. Open wounds were treated. People who had been invisible for years were now being spoken to by name. And then something unexpected began to happen. Emma, that small girl with tangled hair and a homemade doll, became more than just a symbol. She became a leader. Gathering a group of children around her, she pulled out a few old, worn books that someone had donated. "If we want to change things, we have to learn," she told them, her voice filled with resolve. "We can't be afraid anymore." At first, the children sat awkwardly, unsure how to respond. But slowly they leaned in, and before long, they were repeating letters and counting along with Emma's voice. Nearby, a volunteer watched, wiping her eyes. "She's not just teaching them letters," she whispered. "She's teaching them how to hope." From his office, Trump monitored everything closely. He spoke with coordinators multiple times a day, demanded up-to-the-minute reports, and refused to accept shortcuts. "This isn't about dropping off supplies and walking away," he said firmly during one call. "This is about building something that lasts, something they can carry forward even after we're gone." He wasn't interested in a photo op. He was building a foundation, brick by brick, life by life. 1 week after he first stepped out of his car and into that forgotten alley, Donald Trump stood before a crowded press room. Behind him were images projected onto massive screens, photos of volunteers treating the sick, children studying with Emma under a tarp, and families receiving food and shelter for the first time in months. The room buzzed with anticipation. Reporters from every major outlet filled the chairs. Cameras clicked into position. But when Trump walked to the podium, the room hushed into a reverent silence. "When I stopped that day," he began, his voice measured but clear, "I didn't plan on changing anything. I just saw an old woman holding a cardboard sign, and I couldn't drive past her." He paused, allowing the room to settle. Her name was Martha, and standing beside her was a little girl named Emma. They weren't just begging for help. They were reminding us of something deeper, that behind every statistic is a human being with a story, a grandmother with no home, a child holding on to hope with both hands. The crowd remained still, transfixed. "I can't fix the past, but I can promise this. What began as one act will not stop there." He leaned in slightly, voice growing stronger. "This is no longer just about one alley, one neighborhood, one little girl. This is about a movement, one that says no American should feel invisible in their own country." The applause started small, but quickly grew. Not out of obligation, but out of something more rare: belief. Trump continued, "Starting today, we're launching a national initiative, Hope for the Forgotten. We will identify communities like Martha's across the country. We'll bring housing, healthcare, education, and dignity to those long left behind." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the photos behind him. "This is what compassion looks like in action. Not just words, but boots on the ground. Doctors in the streets, teachers under open skies." He concluded with a promise. "This is not a photo op. It's a commitment. And it won't end until every child like Emma, every family like Martha's knows they are not forgotten. Not by me. Not by this country." The room rose to its feet. In the weeks that followed the press conference, change unfolded in the slum with astonishing speed. The makeshift shacks and tents that once lined the narrow alleys were gradually replaced with solid, modest homes. Clean bricks replaced cracked concrete. Fresh paint covered old rust. Solar-powered lights were installed along the streets, chasing away the darkness that had once defined the neighborhood. The place no longer resembled a forgotten corner of the city. It had become something new: Hope Village. That was the name locals chose for their reborn home, a name that carried not just gratitude but pride. Signs bearing the name appeared at the entrances, not printed by government order, but painted by hand by the residents themselves. At the heart of the new community, where a garbage heap once stood, a temporary school was built using mobile classrooms. Rows of wooden desks, simple but clean, stood ready for eager hands. For many of the children, it was the first real school they'd ever seen. Emma was among the first to take a seat, but she didn't stop there. In between her own lessons, she helped the younger children learn their letters and numbers. She guided them with patience far beyond her years. To them, she was more than a student. She was their teacher, their leader, their friend. "I believe if we can learn to read and write, we won't have to be afraid anymore," she told a volunteer who was helping with curriculum. "I want my friends to feel that too." Little by little, the shy children who once hid behind their parents now sat proudly beside Emma, repeating the alphabet, pointing at maps, asking questions. Laughter and learning echoed through the village's new center, replacing the sounds of hunger and desperation. From afar, an elderly resident watched Emma teach. Her voice trembled as she whispered to a nearby health worker, "She's not just a child anymore. She's the light of this place." Meanwhile, Trump kept a close watch on the progress. His team submitted reports daily, photos, figures, updates on health outcomes and school attendance. He read everyone. "This isn't about handouts," he reminded them during one meeting. "We're helping them stand on their own. The goal is independence, not dependency." He made it clear every effort had to be sustainable. New homes had to be built to last. Education couldn't stop at a whiteboard. It had to prepare children for real futures. And every community touched by this movement had to leave stronger than before. The impact of Hope Village was impossible to ignore. What had once been a cluster of collapsing shelters and silent suffering had become a vibrant, self-sustaining community. And the story behind it, of a girl with a cardboard sign and a leader who chose to stop, captured the heart of a nation. Soon, others wanted to be part of it. Charities that had once struggled to gain traction now found themselves flooded with support. Corporations began offering resources, technology, and expertise. Construction companies pledged to build more homes, promising not only quality but long-term maintenance. Tech firms offered free solar panels and internet access to underserved neighborhoods. Educational nonprofits provided mobile classrooms, books, and even digital tablets for children. And through it all, Emma's voice began to travel. Videos of her teaching other children, standing barefoot in front of a chalkboard, went viral. Not because they were polished, but because they were real. A child who had lost everything, standing tall and giving back. In the days that followed, Emma became more than a symbol. She became a messenger. "If we can learn, we can dream," she said in one short clip. "And if we can dream, we can change the world." She didn't speak in speeches. She spoke in sentences, simple, clear, honest. And that's what made people listen. Across the country, schools organized donation drives. Students collected books, backpacks, and clothing to send to newly developing communities like Hope Village. Veterans formed volunteer crews to repair damaged homes. Artists and musicians began hosting benefit concerts to raise funds for construction and education projects. In every corner of the country, people were asking the same question: what if we helped too? 3 months after the first visit to the slum, Trump hosted a special event in Washington to honor those who had joined the mission. The White House had never looked more humble. Inside the Grand Hall stood not just officials and donors, but the very people whose lives had changed. And at the center of it all were Emma and Martha. They walked hand in hand to the stage, Emma now dressed in a simple white dress, her hair neatly braided. She stood behind the podium, the room silent, waiting, not for a speech, but for her heart. "I was just a kid with an old cardboard sign," she began softly. But someone stopped, and because they stopped, my grandma and I aren't alone anymore. Her voice strengthened with each word. "You didn't just help us, you gave me something I never thought I'd have again. A chance to hope, a chance to learn, a chance to dream." When she finished, the applause shook the room. Grown men wiped away tears. Volunteers who had spent months in the field stood in awe of the little girl they'd once watched shiver in the rain. Trump stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "She reminded us what leadership really means," he said. "Not power, not position, but the willingness to stop, to listen, and to act." The story of Emma and Martha didn't stop at Hope Village. As news spread, something remarkable began to happen. People in other countries, in slums, shelters, and disaster zones, began to see themselves in Emma. Her quiet courage echoed far beyond American borders. Trump and his team realized this wasn't just a national crisis, it was a human one. So, months after the first home in Hope Village was completed, a new chapter was announced, the Global Hope Initiative. At a major international summit, Trump stood before world leaders, aid organizations, and journalists from every corner of the globe. "We've seen what's possible when we act with urgency and compassion," he said. "But hardship isn't limited to one country. From drought-stricken villages to war-torn towns, people are crying out, and we must answer." The plan was bold, structured in 3 sweeping phases. 1. Poverty alleviation, clean water projects. In partnership with engineering firms and NGOs, water filtration systems were deployed to remote villages across Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America. Agricultural training. Local farmers were given tools and education to rebuild their lands sustainably, allowing communities to feed themselves. 2. Education and opportunity school construction. Hundreds of schools were planned for remote, underserved regions, places where children had to walk hours just to reach a classroom. Scholarship programs. Exceptional students from impoverished communities would be offered scholarships to top universities, with the goal of creating future leaders within their own nations. 3. Medical access, mobile health clinics. Trucks turned into fully equipped clinics began to roam isolated regions, offering free care, vaccinations, and maternal health support. Newborn and child health programs. Special teams were sent to areas with high infant mortality rates to provide long-term health monitoring and safe childbirth services. The response was overwhelming. Countries offered land. Businesses donated billions in funding and supplies, and people everywhere began using a new phrase: if Emma can, we can too. In a small rural village in Africa, 12-year-old Amara watched a documentary about Emma projected on a sheet under the stars. When the film ended, she turned to her mother and said, "I'm going to help our family, just like she did." Those words became the rallying cry of the movement across the continent. In South America, children living in mountains cut off by landslides received helicopters full of food and water, delivered because local roads were gone. In Southeast Asia, mothers wept as clean water poured from a tap for the first time in their lives. And in the Middle East, orphaned children returned to new classrooms, some holding pencils for the very first time. Of course, the road wasn't easy. In South America, floods delayed major building projects, forcing the use of air transport. In parts of Africa and the Middle East, local authorities were hesitant, worried the movement would challenge their control. But Trump responded not with pressure, but diplomacy, sending trusted envoys to work directly with governments and ensure local communities led the efforts. Even when funding ran low, he hosted a global fundraiser that united billionaires, celebrities, and small donors alike, raising over $1 billion in a single weekend. 1 year after the launch of the Global Hope Initiative, the world gathered in New York City for a once-in-a-generation event, the Global Hope Festival. It wasn't held in a grand concert hall or behind closed doors. It took place in the open, right in Central Park, beneath banners bearing one message in dozens of languages: no one is forgotten. People arrived from every corner of the planet. Volunteers, teachers, construction workers, doctors, donors, and, most importantly, families whose lives had been transformed. They wore handmade signs, traditional clothing, and tears of quiet gratitude. Children who had once lived without water, food, or classrooms now danced and played in fields filled with color. At the center of it all stood Emma. Now a teenager, she had grown taller, her presence more confident, but her eyes still carried that same spark of sincerity. Holding Martha's hand, she stepped onto the main stage, where flags from 70 nations fluttered behind her. The crowd hushed as she approached the microphone. "I once thought I was too small to matter," she said, her voice clear and calm. "I thought no one would hear me, but I learned that when we speak with courage, the world listens." She looked out at the thousands before her, some smiling, others openly crying. "I didn't change the world alone. You did. Every person who helped rebuild, every person who gave, every person who listened. You gave us our lives back. Not just my grandma and me, but millions of people like us." She paused. "I want every child who's watching to know, you don't have to be powerful to make a difference. You just have to care. And never stop." As she stepped back, the crowd rose to its feet in a standing ovation. Applause roared through the trees, echoed down streets, and poured across live streams into millions of homes. Backstage, a young boy from Kenya approached her. He had received a scholarship through the initiative and had flown across oceans to attend the festival. He looked up at her, nervous but determined. "Because of you," he said, "I dared to dream." Emma smiled and gently took his hand. "We can all do it," she told him. "We just have to hold on to hope." Trump followed her on stage shortly after. He didn't speak from a teleprompter. Instead, he looked out over the thousands gathered and simply said, "This movement was never about politics. It was never about headlines. It was about one simple truth. No one should have to suffer in silence." He paused. "If a girl like Emma could stand on a street corner with a cardboard sign and change the world, then what's stopping the rest of us?" The crowd erupted once again. Months after the Global Hope Festival, the world gathered once more, this time at the United Nations headquarters in New York City. In a quiet, tree-lined courtyard outside the main building, a monument stood draped in white fabric. Around it sat world leaders, relief workers, and families from more than 100 nations. Cameras were everywhere, but the mood wasn't one of ceremony. It was reverent, solemn, grateful. This was more than a sculpture. It was a symbol of what humanity could be at its best. As the cloth was pulled away, the crowd gasped. The statue depicted a young girl standing beside an elderly woman. The girl's hand clutched a small cardboard sign that simply read, "Hope never fades." Behind them, carved into the monument's base, were outlines of homes and schools rising from rough terrain. Above them, a flag waved, not of any one country, but of a movement that belonged to everyone. The inscription at the foot of the statue read, "Plant seeds of kindness, so no one is left behind." Emma and Martha sat in the front row, hand in hand. Martha, now more frail, leaned gently against her granddaughter. She didn't speak, her eyes said everything. They shimmered with memory, pride, and quiet awe. Trump approached the podium with uncharacteristic softness in his voice. "This isn't just a monument to the past," he said. "It's a reminder of what we must carry forward. Every child like Emma, every family like Martha's deserves to live with dignity, and it's our duty to make sure they do." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "This statue doesn't just honor what we've done. It demands that we keep going, that we keep choosing compassion, that we keep answering the call of those who cannot shout." Then he turned toward Emma and Martha. "You didn't just change one life," he said. "You've changed the world." Emma was invited to the stage once again. She stood tall, no longer the shy girl with a trembling voice, but a young leader whose presence calmed and inspired. "I hope people see this monument and remember that change begins with noticing someone," she said. "Not looking away, not pretending they aren't there, just stopping long enough to care." The crowd stood and clapped, not politely but passionately. Across languages, cultures, and continents, the message was clear. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. 5 years after Trump stopped his motorcade for a woman with a cardboard sign, the hope for the forgotten movement had reshaped the world. Across continents, stories of transformation poured in. In rural Kenya, villages once plagued by illness now had clean drinking water, thanks to thousands of new filtration systems. In South Asia, families had replaced handmade tents with permanent homes powered by solar energy. In the Andean highlands of South America, where children used to walk hours to reach the nearest school, bright classrooms now stood filled with chalkboards, books, and laughter. More than 10,000 communities had been rebuilt from the ground up. Over 20 million people gained access to clean water. Millions of children went to school for the first time. Thousands of adults were trained in new professions that gave them dignity and stability. And in the heart of it all was a place once known only as a slum, now called Hope Village. Emma, now a young adult, had returned to where it all began. But not as a resident, as a teacher. She stood each morning at the front of a classroom filled with children who, like her once, had seen more hardship than any child should. On the wall behind her hung the original cardboard sign she had held as a child, faded, torn, but never forgotten. "If I could change the world with a sign," she told her students one day, "what can you do with a classroom like this?" A small boy in the back raised his hand shyly. "I want to become a doctor," he said, "so no one has to be scared when they get sick." Emma smiled, her heart full. "I believe in you, and I'll help you get there." The village was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. Homes had gardens, streets were safe, mothers no longer whispered prayers over empty pots. Children played without fear, neighbors held community meetings, art and music returned. And though Martha had grown slower, she still sat each evening on her porch, watching her granddaughter teach. Her eyes full of pride, her voice now quiet with age, but her spirit unchanged. "You've changed the world," she whispered to Emma one day. Emma smiled, brushing her hand over her grandmother's. "Not alone," she said. "Never alone." 10 years after a single cardboard sign stopped a presidential motorcade, the Hope for the Forgotten movement stood as one of the most impactful humanitarian efforts in modern history. But the journey had not been easy. In many regions, the challenges evolved. Climate change intensified storms, floods, and droughts, undoing years of progress in some places. War displaced families faster than homes could be rebuilt. Political instability and economic inequality threatened to unravel hard-earned gains. Yet the movement pressed forward. When floods destroyed new schools in Southeast Asia, mobile classrooms arrived by helicopter. When war displaced entire towns in the Middle East, temporary cities were built in days. When drought dried up crops in East Africa, new irrigation systems were rushed in with trained local engineers. Every time hope was threatened, it came back stronger. Trump, now older but no less driven, continued to lead with urgency and clarity. "We can't solve every problem in a day," he told his team during a strategy summit. "But if we give up, the ones who need us the most will never have a chance. As long as even one person is left behind, we're not done." Emma, now in her early 20s, had become a global figure. She traveled to conferences, visited new hope villages around the world, and helped train young leaders to take the movement even further. But she always returned to her classroom, to her students, to the place where it began. In one of her lessons, she posed a question: "What's the bravest thing someone can do?" One child answered, "Stand up for someone who's hurting." Another said, "Help, even when it's hard." A third whispered, not look away. Emma nodded. All of those are true. But do you know the bravest thing my grandma ever did? She asked. The room leaned in. She didn't stop hoping, even when no one else did. Outside, a monument stood in the center of Hope Village. It had been there for years now, a statue of a girl holding her grandmother's hand. Beneath it were the words that started everything: hope begins in the smallest places. The 10th anniversary of the Hope for the Forgotten movement was more than a celebration. It was a reckoning with just how far a single act of compassion could reach. The event took place in Washington, D.C., in a vast open-air arena, surrounded by flags from every nation touched by the movement. Tens of thousands of people gathered in person, and millions more tuned in from their homes, schools, hospitals, and new communities built by hope. Children ran through the aisles wearing shirts that read, "We were not forgotten." Mothers held up photos of the homes they'd lost, and the ones they had rebuilt. Veterans stood proudly beside families they'd helped rescue and resettle. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, the stage lights lit up, and Donald Trump stepped forward. He looked older. His voice was softer, but when he spoke, it rang with the same clarity as it did on that first day. "We didn't do this for applause," he began. "We didn't do it for headlines. We did it because it was the right thing to do." He paused. 10 years ago, I saw a woman on the side of the road. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. But I knew one thing. I couldn't just keep driving. He turned to the crowd. "Since then, we've rebuilt over 10,000 communities. We've educated millions of children. We've brought water, light, and dignity where the world had forgotten to look. But the most powerful thing we've built is belief. Belief that none of us are too small to matter, and none of us are too great to care." Then he turned to someone standing just behind him. "Emma," he said, beckoning her forward, "your journey is just beginning." Emma stepped up to the podium. Her presence radiated calm strength. She stood not as a symbol, but as a leader in her own right. "I used to think I was just a little girl with a sign," she said. "But I learned that a sign can become a voice. A voice can become a movement. And a movement, when we hold on to it together, can change the world." The crowd rose to its feet. Applause thundered, and for a long moment, neither Trump nor Emma spoke. They just stood side by side, one chapter closing, another opening. Trump placed his hand gently on Emma's shoulder. "Keep going," he said softly. "I will," she replied. A few months after the 10th anniversary celebration, the United Nations unveiled what would become one of the most meaningful monuments in its history. Set just beyond the rows of national flags in a quiet garden on the UN campus, the global monument of hope stood tall, not with grandeur, but with humility. It showed a young girl carved in bronze, holding a weathered cardboard sign above her head. The letters etched onto it were simple: "Hope never fades." Beside her, a soldier knelt, representing those who had fought, sacrificed, and rebuilt across every continent. Behind them, children held books, elders raised water jugs, and homes bloomed from rubble. At the base of the monument was one powerful line: "Hope isn't a feeling, it's a decision." As the cloth fell from the statue, the gathered crowd, delegates, citizens, students, and leaders, rose in silent awe. Then Emma stepped forward. She no longer needed an introduction. Wearing a simple white blouse and a necklace made by children from her home village, she stood before the world with a calm that was earned, not given. "I've learned something over these 10 years, she said. "Hope doesn't come from waiting for things to get better. It comes from choosing to believe they can." She scanned the crowd. "It's not a feeling you have on good days. It's a decision you make on the worst ones." Her voice held steady, but her words carried weight. "Hope is a grandmother who keeps walking when everyone tells her to stop. Hope is a child sharing half a sandwich with a neighbor who has none. Hope is the person who says, 'I don't know how, but I'll help.'" She paused, looking toward the monument. "This statue doesn't honor me," she said. "It honors everyone who chose to stop, to listen, and to act. Because that's where change begins. Not in speeches, not in stone, but in everyday moments of kindness." As she stepped back, the silence lingered, thick with emotion. Then slowly applause spread. Not roaring, but rising, gentle, lasting. And in that moment, the cardboard sign that once shook in a child's hands became something immortal. 15 years after a little girl held up a cardboard sign on a crowded city sidewalk, the world looked different. Hope for the Forgotten had evolved from a movement into a lasting global framework. What started as an emergency response had become policy. What began with temporary shelters now included sustainable cities. What once was a miracle became a model. Across the globe, over 20 million people had gained access to clean water. More than 10,000 communities had been rebuilt or newly developed. Millions of children who once knew only survival had graduated from schools built under the banner of hope. And countless others, volunteers, teachers, engineers, and students, had chosen careers inspired by one moment: a girl, a sign, and a stopped car. But amid the global momentum, one place remained sacred to the story: Hope Village. Emma returned there quietly one spring morning. She walked alone through familiar streets now lined with gardens and murals. Children played in parks where garbage once lay. Solar panels shimmered on rooftops. The air smelled of flowers and fresh bread. She passed the school where she once taught. A new teacher stood at the front of the classroom now. Young, confident, patient. Emma smiled. Outside, she found her way to the monument at the center of the village. The bronze statue of the little girl and her grandmother stood unchanged, though time had aged everything else. At its base, the words remained: "Hope begins in the smallest places." She sat on the bench beside it. For a long while she said nothing. Then a young girl approached, maybe 8 or 9 years old, curious, wide-eyed. "Are you her?" she asked softly. "The girl from the statue?" Emma looked at the child, her heart full. "I was," she said gently. "But now it's your turn." The girl sat beside her. "Do you think I can help people too?" she asked. Emma didn't hesitate. "You already are, just by asking that question." The sun dipped low behind the rooftops. The village, once broken, now breathed with life, laughter, and purpose. Emma rose, brushed the dust from her dress, and walked slowly back toward the road. Behind her, the little girl stayed at the statue, staring up, not at a hero, but at a reflection of what was possible. The story of Martha and Emma had started small, but it echoed across the world, and it reminded humanity, generation after generation: hope is not found, hope is made. This story, though fictional, carries a truth more real than any headline. Around the world, millions still live in silence, waiting, struggling, hoping that someone will notice. They may not stand on city corners with cardboard signs. They may not make the news or spark a global movement, but their pain is real, their dignity is sacred, and their hope is still alive. Emma and Martha may be characters, but the choice that changed their lives? That's real. It's a choice any of us can make. To pause, to listen, to care, to act. You don't need power to make a difference. You don't need wealth to be a hero. You only need the courage to stop and the kindness to stay. Because hope doesn't begin with a monument. It doesn't begin with a campaign. It begins with a person. Someone like you. So if this story touched your heart, let it move your hands. Donate to support a cause that matters. Volunteer your time to someone in need. Share this message and awaken kindness in others. Change doesn't start when the world is ready. It starts when you are. Hope begins in the smallest places. And today, it can begin with you.